The rain had been falling since 4 o'clock, the kind of cold October rain that seeps into your bones and makes you feel every single one of your 62 years. I stood at the ironing board in my little cottage on Hickory Lane, pressing the same blouse I'd pressed 100 times before, a pale blue thing with a frayed collar that I couldn't bring myself to throw away. The iron hissed and spit steam, filling the room with the smell of hot cotton and loneliness. That's what my evenings smelled like. Hot cotton and loneliness, with a hint of the chicken soup I'd made 3 days ago and was still working through. The cottage was quiet, except for the rain drumming against the windows and the occasional creak of the old pipes. I'd lived here for almost 38 years, ever since Arthur had generously offered me the place after my supposed breakdown. "You need somewhere quiet, Mary," he'd said back then, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Somewhere you can heal." I was 24 years old and drowning in grief, and I believed him. I believed everything he told me. The television was off. I couldn't afford cable anymore, and the antenna only picked up static and one local station that played nothing but game show reruns. So I ironed in silence, listening to the storm and trying not to think about how this would be my life until I died. Folding laundry, heating soup, waiting for nothing. I caught my reflection in the dark window and looked away quickly. I didn't like what I saw these days. A woman with silver gray hair that had once been chestnut brown. A face mapped with lines that told the story of every worry, every sleepless night, every bill I couldn't quite pay. Hands that were rough and calloused from decades of cleaning other people's houses to supplement the meager allowance Arthur provided. Family charity, he called it, just enough to keep me alive, just enough to keep me grateful. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. A branch scraped against the side of the house, like fingernails on a coffin lid. I shivered and pulled my cardigan tighter, even though the room wasn't particularly cold. There's a kind of chill that has nothing to do with temperature. The chill of being truly alone in the world, of knowing that if you disappeared tomorrow, the only person who would notice is your landlord. And my landlord was my brother. I set down the iron and rubbed my eyes. 62 years old, and what did I have to show for it? A rented cottage I could barely afford. A closet full of secondhand clothes. A refrigerator with half a pot of soup and some wilting celery. No husband. David had left in 1995, unable to bear the weight of my sadness any longer. No children. We'd never been blessed, and after he left, I'd accepted that some women simply weren't meant for that kind of happiness. And no sister. That was the grief that never healed, the wound that stayed fresh no matter how many years passed. Lillian, my baby sister. 2 years younger than me, with our mother's bright eyes and our father's stubborn chin. She'd died in a hospital fire when she was only 20 years old. I still remembered the phone call from Arthur, his voice shaking. "There was an accident, Mary. A fire in the hospital wing. Lillian didn't make it. Lillian didn't." I'd collapsed right there in the hallway of our father's house, my knees hitting the hardwood floor so hard I carried the bruises for weeks. That was 40 years ago. 40 years of missing her. 40 years of visiting an empty grave in the town cemetery, leaving flowers for a sister who never got to live her life. The knock came at 7:47 p.m. I remember because I'd just glanced at the clock on the wall, the old one with the cracked face that had belonged to my mother. 3 knocks, sharp, urgent. I froze with the iron in my hand. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody ever visited. Arthur came by once a month to collect rent, but he never knocked. He had a key, and he used it like he owned the place, which I suppose he did. The knock came again, louder this time. I set down the iron and walked slowly toward the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see a figure standing on my porch, a woman, tall, wrapped in something dark. The porch light had burned out 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't had the money to replace the bulb, so she was little more than a silhouette against the storm. I opened the door, and I stopped breathing. The woman on my porch looked exactly like my own reflection from 20 years ago. The same high cheekbones, the same determined set to the jaw, the same eyes, our mother's eyes, gray-green like sea glass. But where my face had been carved by hardship, hers had been preserved by something softer. She wore a cashmere coat the color of charcoal, and her silver-streaked hair was swept back in an elegant twist. Rain dripped from her shoulders, and tears, actual tears, were streaming down her face. "Mary?" Her voice cracked on my name. "Mary Sinclair?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was looking at a ghost. I was looking at the impossible. "My name is Lillian," the woman said, and the world tilted beneath my feet. "Lillian Sinclair, I'm your sister." She took a shuddering breath. "Arthur told me you were buried in the town cemetery 30 years ago." The rain was soaking her expensive coat. The wind was howling through the trees. And I was gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles had gone white, because if I let go, I would fall. I would shatter into 1,000 pieces right there on the threshold of my shabby little cottage. "That's not possible," I heard myself whisper. "You died. There was a fire. Arthur told me." Arthur lied. Lillian's voice was steady now, even as her tears kept falling. "There was no fire, Mary. There was never any fire. He separated us. He told me you died of an illness, and he told you I died in a fire, and then he took everything that should have been ours." My legs buckled. Lillian caught me before I hit the floor, her arms strong and sure, and she half-carried me to the worn sofa in my tiny living room. She smelled like expensive perfume and rain, and something else. Something that tugged at a memory buried so deep I'd forgotten it existed. She smelled like home. "I don't understand," I kept saying. "I don't understand. I visited your grave. I brought you flowers every year on your birthday." "There is no grave." Lillian knelt in front of me, gripping my trembling hands. "There's nothing in that plot but empty earth. Arthur invented everything. The death certificate, the memorial service, all of it was fake." I stared at her face. This face that was my face, aged differently, but unmistakably ours. And 40 years of grief came crashing down on me like a wave. I thought of all the birthdays I'd spent alone, lighting a candle for a dead sister. All the Christmases I'd endured at Arthur's table, swallowing his wife's contempt because he was my only family left. All the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, missing Lillian so much it felt like a physical wound, and none of it was real. She had been alive this whole time, alive and mourning. Me. "He stole our lives," I whispered. "Yes." Lillian's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw something fierce flash in her eyes. "But I didn't come here just to tell you that, Mary. I came here to take them back." I reached out with a trembling hand and touched her cheek, warm, real, alive. "Tell me everything," I said. We sat on my worn sofa until well past midnight, two sisters separated by 4 decades of lies, trying to rebuild a bridge that should never have been burned. The storm raged outside, but inside my tiny cottage, something else was happening. Something that felt like resurrection. Lillian held a cup of tea I'd made her, though she'd barely touched it. Her hands, I noticed, were elegant and manicured, so different from my own rough palms. But when she gripped that cup, I saw the same nervous habit our mother had, rotating it slowly, counterclockwise, while she gathered her thoughts. "After Father died," Lillian began, her voice soft in the lamplight, "Arthur came to me. I was 20 years old, still in shock from losing Daddy. Arthur said there was a complication with the estate. He said you'd been struggling, Mary, that you'd had some kind of breakdown after the funeral and needed to be hospitalized." My stomach turned. I never had a breakdown. I was grieving, but I was fine. Arthur was the one who told me I needed rest. He was the one who suggested I move out of the house. I know that now. Lillian's eyes glistened. But back then, I believed every word. He was our big brother. He handled everything after Daddy passed. He told me you'd been committed to a facility for your own safety and that the doctors said visitors would only upset you. And then 3 weeks later, he called me at my friend's house and said you'd caught pneumonia, that you were gone. I closed my eyes, remembering those same weeks from my side of the mirror. Arthur, so concerned, so helpful. Lillian's gone to Europe, Mary. A school exchange program. She left before I could stop her. And then, his voice breaking on the phone, theatrical in its grief. There was a fire at the hospital where she was volunteering. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He played us against each other's grief, I whispered. He was clever. Lillian's voice hardened. Diabolically clever. Within a month, I was on a plane to Switzerland, a boarding school he said Daddy had arranged before his death. I was grieving, alone, and I didn't question it. I didn't question anything. What happened to you there? I asked, desperately hungry for the missing years. Lillian took a breath and set down her tea. I survived. That's the simplest way to say it. The school was real, expensive, prestigious, isolated. I finished my education there, then went to law school in London. I never came back to Whitmore Falls. Arthur told me there was nothing left here for me, that the house had been sold, that the family was scattered. And I believed him, Mary, because believing him was easier than facing the alternative. She paused, staring at the rain streaming down my window. I built a life in New York, became a corporate attorney, made partner at my firm by 40, married a good man named Robert who died of cancer 8 years ago. No children. We tried, but it wasn't meant to be. Her voice caught. I had everything money could buy, and I was so lonely I sometimes couldn't breathe, because the only family I thought I had was Arthur, and every time I called him, he had an excuse for why we couldn't meet. He was busy. He was traveling. His wife was ill. Always something. He was keeping you away, I said. Keeping you from seeing me. Yes, and keeping me from asking too many questions about the trust. I leaned back against the sofa cushions, my head spinning. I need you to understand what my life has been, Lillian. These 40 years you were building a career, I gestured around the cottage, at the water stain on the ceiling, the second-hand furniture, the bare walls. I was this. Tell me. So I told her. I told her about the cottage Arthur generously provided after my supposed breakdown, how he convinced me I wasn't stable enough to work a real job, how he gave me a small monthly allowance that he called family charity, how that allowance was never quite enough, so I started cleaning houses at 30 to make ends meet. I told her about Dolores, Arthur's wife, who looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoes, the way she'd parade around at Christmas dinners wearing mother's pearl necklace, our mother's necklace, while I sat at the far end of the table in a dress from Goodwill. I told her about Constance Harwell, Dolores's vicious sister, who spread rumors through town that I was troubled. Poor Mary Sinclair. She'd whisper loudly enough for me to hear at the grocery store, never quite right in the head after her father and sister died. Such a tragedy. Arthur's a saint for taking care of her. I told her about my marriage to David, a kind man, a patient man, who eventually couldn't bear the weight of my perpetual sadness. He said it was like living with a ghost, I admitted, my voice cracking. And he was right. Part of me died when you died, Lillian. Except you didn't die. You were alive the whole time, and I was mourning a lie. By the time I finished, Lillian's hands were shaking. I saw her jaw tighten, saw the controlled fury in her sea-glass eyes. She was a woman who had spent decades in courtrooms, mastering her emotions, presenting facts without flinching. But this was personal. He charged you rent, she said quietly. Arthur charged you rent to live in this cottage? $600 a month. He said it was a family discount. A discount. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mary, do you know what our father's trust was worth when he died? $4.2 million. Split 3 ways, that would have been... I don't want to know. I held up my hand. Not yet. I can't. You need to know. Lillian leaned forward, gripping my hands again. Because that money didn't disappear. Arthur has been living off it for 40 years. The house we grew up in, Edgewood, he never sold it. He's been living there this whole time, with Dolores and their sons, spending money that belonged to all of us, while you cleaned strangers' toilets to pay rent to him. The room seemed to tilt. I thought of all the times I'd driven past Edgewood on my way to a cleaning job, glimpsing the white columns through the maple trees, remembering running through those halls as a child. I'd assumed it was long gone, sold to strangers, lost like everything else. But it had been there all along. Arthur had been there, sleeping in our father's bedroom, hosting dinner parties in our mother's dining room, while I scraped by in a cottage he owned. "How did you find out?" I asked. "After all this time, how did you learn the truth?" Lillian reached into her leather bag and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. 6 months ago, I was handling an estate case for a client. Routine work, probate, asset distribution, nothing unusual. But the case referenced an old trust from Connecticut as a comparable, and when I pulled the records, I saw the name. The Sinclair Family Trust. Our name. Our father's trust. She opened the folder and spread papers across my coffee table. Legal documents, bank statements, photocopies of signatures. "I found my own death certificate, Mary, and yours, dated 3 weeks apart, both from 1984. Both signed by a Dr. Harold Fenwick, who died of a heart attack in 1989. She pointed to a signature on one of the documents, and then I found this. A document supposedly signed by me at age 20, relinquishing all claims to the trust. Except I never signed this. I've never even seen it before." I stared at the loops and swirls of the signature. It did look like Lillian's handwriting, close enough to fool a casual observer. But Lillian was shaking her head. Arthur forged everything. The death certificates, my signature, amendments to the trust, naming himself sole beneficiary. He's been committing fraud for 4 decades, and he's been doing it under the nose of Reverend Theodore Ashby, who conducted my memorial service, in 1984. Reverend Ashby knew? I felt sick. Reverend Ashby has been receiving very generous donations from Arthur for 40 years. I have the bank records to prove it. The wind howled outside, and a branch cracked somewhere in the darkness. I was trying to absorb it all. The scope of the betrayal, the years of manipulation, the casual cruelty of a brother who had stolen not just money but time. 40 years of sisterhood, 40 years of holidays and phone calls, and ordinary precious moments. "I've had forensic accountants working on this for months," Lillian continued. "The paper trail is extensive. Arthur wasn't careful because he never thought anyone would look. He never imagined that either of us would come back from the dead." She was about to say more when headlights swept across the front window, cutting through the rain like searchlights. We both froze. A car was coming down my driveway, slowly, deliberately, the engine growling low. Lillian stood and moved toward the window, her body tense. "Are you expecting anyone?" My heart hammered against my ribs. No one ever comes here except..." The car stopped. A door opened and slammed shut. Heavy footsteps on the porch. "Except Arthur," I finished, my voice barely a whisper. "He has a key." The doorknob rattled, then turned. The door swung open, and Arthur Sinclair filled the frame like a thundercloud in a cashmere overcoat. He was 68 years old, but he carried himself like a man who had never been told no. Silver hair swept back from a high forehead, a face that had grown jowly with age, but still retained the sharp, calculating eyes I remembered from childhood. He wore his wealth like armor, the Rolex glinting on his wrist, the Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mary." His voice was honey over broken glass. "I saw the lights on and wanted to make sure you were safe. This storm is..." He stopped. He had seen Lillian. I watched the transformation happen in real time. First, the flicker of recognition, the same face, the same eyes, the impossible ghost standing in my living room. Then the rapid calculation behind his gaze, the wheels turning as he tried to process what this meant. And finally, the mask sliding back into place, though not quite as smoothly as before. "Who is this?" Arthur's voice was steady, but I caught the slight tremor. "Mary, who is this woman?" "You know exactly who she is." My own voice surprised me, stronger than I'd heard it in years. "You've always known, Arthur, because you're the one who told me she was dead." Lillian stepped forward into the lamplight, and I saw Arthur flinch, actually flinch, like a man who'd seen a corpse sit up in its coffin. "Hello, Arthur." Lillian's tone was ice and steel. "It's been 40 years. You look older than I expected. Guilt will do that to a person." "I don't know what kind of scam you're running," Arthur started, but his voice cracked on the last word. "Scam?" Lillian laughed, and there was nothing warm in it. "That's rich, coming from a man who forged 2 death certificates and embezzled $4 million from his own sisters." Arthur's face went pale, then flushed red. He fumbled in his coat pocket for his phone, his fingers clumsy in a way I'd never seen. "This is insane. Mary, this woman is clearly disturbed. I'm calling the police." "Call them." Lillian crossed her arms. "I'd love to explain to the Whitmore Falls Sheriff's Department how you've been committing fraud, forgery, and identity theft since 1984. I have the documents right here." She gestured to the folder on my coffee table. Every signature, every bank transfer, every lie. Arthur's thumb hovered over his phone screen. He didn't dial 911. Instead, I heard him mutter something, a name, an instruction, and then he shoved the phone back in his pocket. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous. "Both of you. I don't know who put you up to this, but I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure neither of you sees a dime of—" A car door slammed outside, then another. Arthur smiled, a thin, cruel expression that I remembered from childhood, from moments when he knew he'd won. "Ah, reinforcements." The door opened again, and Dolores Sinclair swept in on a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and righteous indignation. She was 65, but fought it with every weapon money could buy. The facelift, the designer clothes, the blonde hair that hadn't been natural in 30 years. Behind her came Constance Harwell, her sister, a woman whose face seemed permanently arranged into an expression of sour disapproval. "Arthur, what is going on?" Dolores's voice was shrill. "You called and said there was an emergency. You said some woman was—" She stopped mid-sentence as her eyes landed on Lillian. Unlike Arthur, she didn't bother hiding her reaction. Her mouth fell open, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. "Oh my God," she breathed. "She looks just like—" "An imposter," Arthur cut in firmly. "A very convincing imposter who has somehow fooled Mary into believing she's Lillian. You know how fragile Mary is, how susceptible to these kinds of manipulations. I am not fragile." The words came out of me with a force that startled everyone, including myself. "And I am not senile, Arthur, no matter how many times you've tried to convince this town otherwise." Dolores recovered quickly, her face hardening into familiar contempt. "Mary, sweetheart, you don't know what you're saying. This woman, whoever she is, has clearly taken advantage of your loneliness. It's sad, really, pathetic even." Pathetic. I tasted the word like ash. "You've called me pathetic for 40 years, Dolores. Usually behind my back, but sometimes right to my face at your Christmas dinners while you were wearing my mother's pearls." Dolores's hand flew to her throat where those very pearls rested against her collarbone. "These were a gift from Arthur, family heirlooms that you were clearly too unstable to—" "They were never his to give." Lillian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Just like the house wasn't his to keep, just like the trust wasn't his to steal." Constance Harwell stepped forward, her thin lips pursed. "Now you listen here. I don't know who you think you are, waltzing into this town with your fancy coat and your accusations, but the Sinclairs have been pillars of this community for generations. Arthur has supported Mary for decades, out of the goodness of his heart, while she couldn't even hold down a job. And you expect us to believe that he's the villain? I couldn't hold down a job, I said slowly, because Arthur convinced me I was too fragile to work. Because he gave me just enough money to survive, but never enough to escape. Because every time I tried to build something for myself, someone in this town would remind me that I was troubled. That I wasn't quite right. I looked at Connie with 40 years of suppressed fury. Someone like you, Constance. Connie's face flushed an ugly red. How dare you? How dare I? My voice rose. How dare you? All of you. You stole my sister. You stole my inheritance. You stole my life. And you have the audacity to stand in my home and call me pathetic? Arthur stepped toward me, his hand raised as if to calm a hysterical child. Mary, you need to settle down. You're having an episode. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This woman has clearly triggered some kind of psychological break. Dolores, call Dr. Patterson. We may need to have Mary evaluated. The threat hung in the air, the same threat that had controlled me for 40 years. The whispered suggestion that I was unstable, the implication that I could be locked away at any moment if I didn't behave. But something had changed. Something had shifted inside me the moment Lillian walked through my door. I'm not having an episode, Arthur. I stood up straight, my shoulders back, looking my brother in the eye for the first time in decades. I'm finally seeing clearly. This is absurd. Arthur turned to Lillian, jabbing a finger at her chest. I don't know who you really are, but you're going to regret this. I have lawyers. I have connections in this town that go back 50 years. I will have you arrested for fraud, for trespassing, for... I am a lawyer. Lillian's voice was calm, almost amused. Senior partner at Warren, Castellano and Associates in New York. I've spent 30 years in courtrooms far more intimidating than your living room, Arthur. Your threats don't scare me. Arthur's face contorted. Get out of this house. This house? Lillian raised an eyebrow. You mean the house you own? The house you charge our sister $600 a month to live in, using money from an allowance that comes from her own inheritance? She shook her head. The audacity is almost impressive. I said get out. Arthur's voice cracked into a shout. Both of you! I want you out of this cottage by morning, Mary. I'm done supporting your delusions. I'm done being the family scapegoat while you... Another car pulled up outside. Headlights swept across the window and a door slammed. Arthur paused, his rage momentarily interrupted. He turned toward the window with a look of expectation. Finally. Nathan. He'll sort this out. The door opened, and a young man stepped inside, younger than the others, maybe late 30s, with Arthur's height, but none of his cruel confidence. Nathan Sinclair had the look of someone who had been dragged somewhere against his will. His eyes moved quickly around the room, taking in the scene. His father's rage, his mother's contempt, his Aunt Connie's pinched disapproval. Two women, one he knew, one he didn't. His gaze landed on me first. I saw something flicker there. Recognition, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like guilt. Then he looked at Lillian, and his face went pale. Dad, Nathan said slowly, his voice uncertain. Dad, who is that? She looks exactly like the woman in Grandpa's photographs, the ones in the attic, the ones you told me were... Nathan. Arthur's voice was sharp, warning. Not now. But Nathan wasn't looking at his father anymore. He was looking at Lillian, then at me, then back at Lillian. And in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen from anyone in the Sinclair family in 40 years. Doubt. The room had gone very still. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the windows like it wanted in. But inside my little cottage, a different kind of storm was building, one that had been gathering strength for 40 years. Nathan stood in the doorway, his face a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. He kept looking between Lillian and the wall behind me, where a single framed photograph hung, one of the few possessions I'd managed to keep from my childhood. It showed two young girls in matching Sunday dresses, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. Lillian and me, ages 8 and 6. "That photograph," Nathan said slowly. "Dad, that photograph, the woman in it, is me." Lillian stepped forward, her voice steady. "Lillian Marie Sinclair, born April 3, 1964, supposedly died in a hospital fire on October 15, 1984. Except I didn't die, Nathan. I was sent to a boarding school in Switzerland and told that my sister Mary had died of pneumonia. Your father separated us. He forged our death certificates, and he's been stealing from both of us ever since." "That's a lie," Dolores shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "Arthur, tell them it's a lie." But Arthur said nothing. He was staring at the manila folder on my coffee table like it was a snake coiled to strike. Lillian picked up the folder and began laying documents out on the table, one by one, like a dealer spreading cards. Death certificate for Mary Sinclair, dated September 22, 1984. Signed by Dr. Harold Fenwick. She placed another paper beside it. Death certificate for Lillian Sinclair, dated October 15, 1984. Also signed by Dr. Fenwick. Interesting coincidence that the same doctor signed both, don't you think? Especially since Dr. Fenwick was known to have significant gambling debts that were mysteriously paid off in late 1984. "This proves nothing," Arthur growled, but his voice had lost its certainty. "No?" Lillian placed another document on the table. "How about this? A signed affidavit from Lillian Sinclair, dated October 1, 1984, relinquishing all claims to the Sinclair Family Trust. Except I never signed this, Arthur. I was already in Switzerland by October 1st. I have my boarding school enrollment records to prove it, which means someone forged my signature." She leaned closer to him. "Someone who had access to old documents with my handwriting. Someone who stood to gain $4 million if both his sisters conveniently disappeared." Constance grabbed Arthur's arm. "Arthur, do something. Make her stop." "I'm just getting started." Lillian pulled out a sheaf of bank statements. "These are records of wire transfers from the Sinclair Family Trust to various accounts over the past 40 years. Personal accounts, investment accounts, a very generous donation fund to Grace Community Church." She looked up, her eyes cold. "Which brings me to Reverend Theodore Ashby." Arthur's face went gray. "What about him?" "I visited him this afternoon, before I came here." Lillian's voice was almost casual now, the voice of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument she knew she'd already won. "Lovely church, by the way. Beautiful stained glass. The Reverend was in his office when I arrived, working on Sunday's sermon. He was very surprised to see me. I watched Arthur's hands begin to tremble. I showed him the bank records," Lillian continued. 40 years of donations from the Sinclair family. Donations that happened to spike significantly every time there was a legal filing related to the trust. I showed him the memorial service program from 1984. His name is on it, Arthur. He conducted a funeral service for a woman who wasn't dead. Theodore wouldn't, Arthur started. Theodore broke down crying within 15 minutes. Lillian's voice hardened. "He's 72 years old, Arthur. He's thinking about his legacy, about standing before his God. And when I explained that he could either cooperate with my investigation or face charges as an accessory to fraud, forgery, and embezzlement, he made a very sensible choice." She pulled out one final document and held it up for everyone to see. Even from across the room, I could make out the official letterhead, the signatures at the bottom. "This is a signed statement from Reverend Theodore Ashby, witnessed and notarized this afternoon, confessing his role in the falsification of death records and the cover-up of Arthur Sinclair's embezzlement of the Sinclair Family Trust. He's prepared to testify in court." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Dolores's face drain of color, watched Constance's hand fly to her mouth, watched Arthur's carefully constructed world begin to crumble around him. And then Arthur laughed. It was an ugly sound, harsh, bitter, desperate. "You think this matters? You think some senile old preacher's ramblings will hold up in court? I have lawyers, Lillian. Real lawyers. not whatever ambulance-chasing firm you work for in New York. I will bury you in motions and depositions. I will drag this out for years, decades, and when I'm done, you and Mary will have nothing but legal bills and broken dreams." He stepped toward me, and for the first time in 40 years, I saw the mask fully off. This was the real Arthur, not the charming benefactor, not the concerned brother, but the cold, calculating predator who had devoured his own family's future. "And you, Mary," he hissed, "you think you can turn on me after everything I've done for you? I kept you alive. I gave you a roof over your head when no one else would have you. Without me, you'd be in a gutter somewhere, talking to pigeons." "You kept me in a cage," I said quietly. "You fed me just enough to survive, and you made me thank you for it." "Ungrateful." Arthur's voice rose. "Both of you. Ungrateful, delusional women who don't understand what it takes to manage a family legacy. Our father was a fool. He would have split the trust 3 ways and watched it evaporate in a generation. I preserved it. I grew it. Everything I did for this family." "You did it for yourself," Lillian said. "And it's over, Arthur. It was over before I even walked through Mary's door tonight." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Lillian smiled, a small, satisfied expression that reminded me suddenly, powerfully, of our mother. "Did you think I'd come here with just a preacher's confession and some bank statements? Arthur, I'm a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms on the East Coast. I've spent 30 years building cases against men who thought they were untouchable, men far smarter and far more careful than you." She reached into her bag and pulled out one last envelope, thick, official, bearing a seal I didn't recognize. "The forensic accountants finished their report 3 weeks ago. It documents every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every dollar you stole from your own sisters. And as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, that report is in the hands of the Connecticut State Attorney's Office." She dropped the envelope on the table with a soft thud. "They'll be opening a formal investigation on Monday morning. I'd get a good criminal defense lawyer if I were you. Not a real estate attorney. A criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need one." Arthur staggered backward as if he'd been struck. Dolores let out a small moan. Constance was already fumbling for her phone, probably calling her own lawyer. But I wasn't looking at any of them anymore. I was looking at Nathan. He stood apart from his family, his face ashen, his eyes moving between the documents on the table and his father's crumbling facade. I saw the moment it all clicked into place for him. The family stories that never quite added up. The aunt who lived in poverty while his parents lived in luxury. The photographs in the attic that his father kept locked away. Slowly, quietly, while his parents were still reeling, Nathan crossed the room toward me. He moved like a man walking through a dream or a nightmare. "Aunt Mary." His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I looked up at this young man, my nephew, whom I'd watched grow up from a distance, never allowed to be a real part of his life. I saw the genuine anguish in his eyes, the shame that his family name now carried. "I believe you," I said softly. He knelt beside the sofa, his head bowed, and in a voice so quiet that only I could hear, he said 5 words that changed everything. "I'm sorry. I want to help." I didn't sleep that night. How could I? After Arthur and his entourage finally left, Dolores in tears, Constance spitting threats, Arthur silent and seething, Lillian and I sat together until dawn crept through the windows. We talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories that had been buried under decades of grief, the sound of our mother's laugh, the way our father used to read to us on Sunday mornings, his deep voice turning fairy tales into magic. And we talked about tomorrow, what would happen, what we needed to do. "Are you scared?" Lillian asked me as the first gray light of morning touched the horizon. I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I said finally, and I meant it. "I've been scared for 40 years, Lillian. Scared of Arthur's disapproval. Scared of losing what little I had. scared that if I made one wrong move, everything would fall apart. I looked at my sister, my living, breathing sister, sitting beside me on my worn-out sofa. I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry. And I'm ready. Lillian squeezed my hand. Good. Because today, we take back everything. By 8 o'clock, I had showered and dressed in the nicest clothes I owned. A simple navy dress I'd bought secondhand for job interviews I never went on. Lillian had changed too, into a crisp gray suit that probably cost more than my car. She looked like what she was, a warrior preparing for battle. A knock at the door made my heart stutter, but it wasn't Arthur this time. It was Nathan. He stood on my porch looking like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usually neat hair disheveled. He wore jeans and a rumpled sweater, nothing like the polished family image his parents always insisted on. I know you have no reason to trust me, he said, before I could speak. My father did terrible things. My mother helped him cover it up. I grew up in that house, eating food paid for with stolen money, and I never questioned it. I should have questioned it. Nathan, I started. Please. He held up a hand. Let me finish. I spent all night thinking about this. About the stories my father told me. That you were troubled, that you needed to be protected from yourself. About the way my mother treated you at holidays, like you were some kind of embarrassment. About the photographs in the attic that I wasn't supposed to look at. His voice cracked. I found them when I was 16, pictures of two girls who looked like twins. I asked my father about them, and he said they were old friends of the family who had died. He lied to my face, and I believed him. You were a child, Lillian said gently. Children believe their parents. I'm not a child anymore. Nathan's jaw tightened with determination. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent my whole life benefiting from my father's crimes. I can't undo that, but I can choose what kind of man I want to be going forward. He looked directly at me, and I saw our father in his eyes, the same steadiness, the same quiet integrity that Arthur had never possessed. I want to help. Whatever you need, testimony, documents, access to the house, I'll give it. I'll stand with you today if you'll let me. I looked at Lillian. She gave me a small nod. All right, I said. Come inside. We have a lot to do. We arrived at Edgewood at 10 o'clock in the morning, the October sun casting long shadows across the circular driveway. Sheriff Dennis Hartwell was already there, along with 2 deputies and a stern-faced woman from the state attorney's office who introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Michelle Chen. I hadn't seen the house up close in almost 40 years. It looked exactly as I remembered and completely different. The white columns still rose majestically toward the blue sky. The maple trees my grandfather had planted still lined the drive, their leaves a riot of red and gold. But now I saw it with new eyes. Now I saw it for what it was, a monument to theft, built on the bones of my stolen life. Are you ready? Lillian asked. I took a deep breath. Yes. We walked up the front steps together, me, Lillian, Nathan, the sheriff, the deputies, and Ada Chen. A strange procession coming to reclaim what had been lost. Arthur opened the door before we could knock. He looked terrible. His face was gray and unshaven, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. But even now, even at the end, he tried to maintain his dignity. He stood in the doorway of our father's house, my house, Lillian's house, and blocked our entry like he still had the right. Sheriff Hartwell. His voice was cool. I assume there's been some misunderstanding? No misunderstanding, Mr. Sinclair. The sheriff held up a document. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and identity theft. I also have a warrant to search these premises for evidence related to those charges. This is absurd. Arthur's mask flickered, revealing the desperation beneath. I'm a respected member of this community. I've donated more money to local charities than our money, Lillian cut in, Mary's money, and my money. You donated our inheritance to make yourself look generous. From inside the house, I heard Dolores's voice rise in a shriek. "Arthur, what's happening? Who are these people?" She appeared behind him, still in her silk robe and slippers, her face bare of makeup for the first time I'd ever seen. When she spotted the sheriff, then me, then Lillian, her expression cycled through shock, fear, and finally a desperate, cornered fury. "You can't come in here." She tried to push past Arthur to block the door more fully. "This is private property. We have rights." "Ma'am, please step aside." Sheriff Hartwell's voice was calm but firm. "We have a legal warrant. You can cooperate or you can be arrested for obstruction. Your choice." Dolores's eyes darted around wildly, looking for escape, for an ally, for someone to make this all go away. Then she bolted back into the house. "Dolores!" Arthur shouted, but he couldn't move. One of the deputies had already taken his arm, was already reciting his rights in that flat, official cadence I'd only ever heard on television. I watched my brother's face as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Something shifted in his expression, the arrogance draining away, leaving behind something hollow and old. For just a moment, he looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in 40 years. I expected to see hatred, or anger, or even fear. What I saw was worse. I saw nothing, just emptiness where a soul should have been. Inside the house, there was a commotion. I heard Dolores screaming about family loyalty, about betrayal, about how we would all pay for this. Then I heard a different kind of scream, one of pure frustration, followed by a deputy's voice saying, "Ma'am, you need to put the jewelry box down and step away from the fireplace." She'd been trying to burn evidence or hide valuables, maybe both. Constance Harwell appeared at the edge of the property, having apparently spent the night in the guest house. She took one look at the police cars, at Arthur in handcuffs, and immediately turned to run. "Stop right there, ma'am." A deputy moved to intercept her. "I don't have anything to do with this." Connie's voice rose to a screech. "I'm just family. I didn't know anything about any of this." "We'll sort that out at the station," the deputy said, guiding her firmly toward one of the patrol cars. And then it was quiet. Arthur was in the back of a sheriff's car, his silver hair visible through the window. Dolores was being escorted out of the house, her wrists in handcuffs, mascara streaming down her face from tears she'd finally found. Constance sat in another car, still protesting her innocence to anyone who would listen. Lillian walked up beside me, and without a word, she pressed something into my hand. Keys. Old brass keys on a ring that I recognized from my childhood. The ring our father used to carry in his pocket, the one that opened every door in this house. "This was always yours, Mary," Lillian said softly. "Arthur was just a squatter." I stood there holding those keys, feeling their weight in my palm. 40 years. 40 years of exile, of poverty, of believing I was alone in the world. And now I was standing on the threshold of my childhood home, about to step inside for the first time since I was 22 years old. The door was open. I walked through. The foyer smelled like furniture polish and old money, exactly as I remembered. The staircase curved upward to the left, its mahogany banister gleaming. Our mother's portrait still hung above the fireplace, her kind eyes watching me return. "Welcome home," Lillian whispered behind me. I couldn't speak. I could only walk forward, touching walls and door frames like a blind woman learning a new room. The library, the sitting room, the kitchen where our mother used to bake apple pies on Sunday afternoons. And then I found Arthur's study. His desk was massive, mahogany like everything else, and covered with papers that the investigators would soon take as evidence. But my eye was drawn to something else. A box on the floor beside the desk, half hidden under a fallen coat. I knelt down and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, our family, our childhood, our parents, Lillian and me in matching dresses, our mother on her wedding day, our father holding each of us as babies. And beneath the photographs, wrapped in velvet, was a smaller box. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. Our mother's jewelry, all of it. Not just the pearls Dolores had been wearing, but everything. The diamond earrings, the ruby brooch, the sapphire ring our father had given her on their 20th anniversary. Arthur had kept it all, hidden away like a dragon's hoard. At the very bottom of the box, I found an envelope addressed to my darling girls, my mother's handwriting, a letter we were never meant to see. The letter was dated June 3, 1983, 1 year before our father died, 1 year before Arthur tore our family apart. I sat on the floor of Arthur's study with the yellowed envelope in my trembling hands, Lillian beside me, our shoulders touching. The investigators had given us a moment of privacy when they saw what we'd found. Even they seemed to understand that some things were sacred. "Read it out loud," Lillian whispered. "Please, I need to hear her voice." I unfolded the paper carefully, terrified it might crumble in my hands. Our mother's elegant handwriting filled the page, the same handwriting that had signed our permission slips and written our birthday cards, that had left notes in our lunch boxes saying, "I love you," and "You can do anything." "My darling girls," I began, my voice shaking. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I hope with all my heart that you are reading it together. Your father and I have always known that the greatest gift we could give you wasn't money or property. It was each other. Sisters are forever. Remember that, no matter what life brings. I must confess something that has weighed on me. I have worried about your brother Arthur for many years. There is a coldness in him that I cannot reach, a hunger that I cannot satisfy. He has always wanted more attention, more praise, more control. I have tried to love this out of him, but I fear I have failed. If something should happen to your father and me, I want you to watch over each other. Do not let Arthur come between you. Do not let him convince you that you are less than what you are. You are strong, brilliant, beautiful women, and you deserve every happiness. The trust your father and I have established is meant for all three of you equally. This was always our wish. If Arthur tries to tell you otherwise, know that he is lying. I love you both more than words can say. Be good to each other. Be good to yourselves. And remember that wherever I am watching over you, proud of the women you have become. All my love, forever and always. Mother. The last word came out as a sob. Lillian's arms were around me, and we were both crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of grief, but the raw, heaving sobs of women who had finally found what they'd lost. Our mother had known. She had seen the darkness in Arthur, had tried to warn us. But her letter had been buried in a box, hidden away by the very son she had feared. She knew, Lillian gasped. She knew, and she tried to protect us. He hid it. I clutched the letter to my chest. He found this letter, and he hid it, because it proved everything. It proved she wanted us together. It proved the trust was meant to be shared. We sat there on the floor of our childhood home, holding each other as the morning sun streamed through the windows. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't feel alone. I felt my mother's presence around us, her love wrapping us up like a warm blanket on a cold night. We had found each other again, and nothing, no amount of time, no depth of betrayal, could take that away. 3 weeks later, the leaves had fallen from the maples, and the first frost had painted the lawns of Whitmore Falls silver. The news had spread through town like wildfire. Arthur Sinclair, pillar of the community, arrested on 17 felony counts. Dolores Sinclair, his devoted wife, charged as an accessory. Reverend Theodore Ashby, beloved pastor of Grace Community Church, had resigned in disgrace and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. The trial wouldn't begin for months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Lillian's forensic accountants had traced every dollar, every forged signature, every lie. Arthur's lawyers were already talking about plea deals. I had moved into Edgewood, my home finally, after 4 decades of exile. Lillian was staying with me while we sorted through the legal and financial tangles Arthur had left behind. The house was too big for one person, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like possibility. On a gray November afternoon, I was sitting in the library, our father's library, with its leather chairs and walls of books, when Nathan came to see me. He looked worse than he had on the night of the confrontation. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He stood in the doorway like a man approaching a judge, waiting for sentencing. "Aunt Mary," he said, "thank you for seeing me." "Sit down, Nathan." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." He sat, his hands clasped between his knees. "I resigned from my teaching position last week. I couldn't—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I couldn't stand in front of those kids knowing what my family did, knowing that every field trip, every classroom supply, every scholarship I helped fund, it was all stolen money. Your money. That wasn't your choice," I said gently. "You didn't steal anything. I benefited from it." His voice cracked. "I grew up in this house, Aunt Mary. I ate at that table, slept in those beds, took all of it for granted, and I never asked questions. Even when things didn't add up, I never pushed, because it was easier not to know." I was quiet for a moment, letting him sit with his guilt. I could have told him it was fine, that none of it was his fault, that he was absolved. But that would have been a lie, and we'd had enough lies in this family to last several lifetimes. "You're right," I said finally. "You did benefit. And you didn't ask questions when you should have. That's something you'll have to carry." He flinched, but he didn't look away. "But here's what I've learned in 62 years of living, Nathan." I leaned forward. "We don't get to choose the family we're born into. We don't get to undo the past. What we can do, the only thing we can do, is choose who we want to be going forward. And you came to me that night. You offered to help when it would have been easier to stay silent. That counts for something. I don't know what to do now." His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know who I am without being Arthur Sinclair's son." "Then let me offer you something." I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a folder. "Lillian and I have been talking. The money that's being recovered from your father's accounts, there's a lot of it. More than 2 women could spend in several lifetimes. We've decided to start a foundation, a real one, not the vanity projects your father funded. We want to help people in this town who've been overlooked. Single mothers, elderly people living alone, kids who need scholarships to escape difficult situations." Nathan looked at the folder like it might bite him. "We need someone to run it," I continued. "Someone who knows this town, who understands what it means to realize everything you believed was built on lies, who wants to spend the rest of his life making things right." I slid the folder across the table. "I'm offering you a job, Nathan, not as charity, as responsibility. Hard work, long hours, no glory. A chance to turn your family's stolen fortune into something that actually helps people." He stared at me, tears streaming down his face. "Why would you trust me? After everything my family did to you? Because your grandmother asked me to." I touched the letter in my pocket. I carried it everywhere now. "She told us to be good to each other. She said sisters are forever." "Well, Nathan, you're my sister's nephew. That makes you family. Real family, not the kind that steals and lies. And real family gives second chances." He took the folder with shaking hands. "I don't deserve this." "Probably not," I agreed. "But you can earn it. That's the difference between you and your father. You're willing to try." December came softly to Whitmore Falls, bringing early snow that dusted the grounds of Edgewood like powdered sugar. Lillian and I had fallen into a rhythm. Breakfast together, long walks through the gardens, evenings by the fire sharing stories of our separate lives. We were learning each other again, filling in the 40-year gap one conversation at a time. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, we sat on the enclosed porch at the back of the house, wrapped in blankets, drinking tea from our mother's china. The cups had been locked away in Arthur's study for decades, but they were ours now. Everything was ours now. "I keep thinking about what we lost," Lillian said, watching the snow fall. All those years, all those moments we should have shared. I know. I curled my hands around my teacup, feeling its warmth. I think about it too. The phone calls we never made, the holidays we never spent together, the ordinary Tuesday afternoons that we'll never get back. Does it make you angry? I considered the question carefully. A month ago, the answer would have been yes, a furious, burning yes that consumed everything it touched. But something had shifted in the weeks since Arthur's arrest. The anger was still there, but it had transformed into something else, something quieter but stronger. It makes me determined, I said finally. Determined not to waste another day. We can't get back the 40 years Arthur stole from us, Lillian, but we can make sure the next 40 count for something. Lillian smiled, our mother's smile, warm and bright and full of love. The next 40. I like the sound of that. We'll be over 100. And still causing trouble, I hope. She laughed, and the sound filled the porch like music. Definitely still causing trouble. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow blanket the gardens where we used to play as children. The same gardens, the same trees, the same stone path leading down to the pond. But everything was different now. I was different. For 40 years, I had believed I was alone. I had believed my sister was dead. My inheritance was gone. My life was a small, cramped thing to be endured rather than lived. Arthur had stolen more than money. He had stolen my sense of myself, my belief that I mattered, my hope for anything better. But Lillian had knocked on my door on a stormy October night, and everything had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had stood at her ironing board, folding the same blouse for the 100th time. I wasn't the same woman who had accepted crumbs from her brother's table and called them blessings. I had remembered who I was, Mary Sinclair, daughter of Edward and Eleanor, sister to Lillian, rightful heir to a legacy of love and family and belonging. My life at 62 wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Lily, I said softly, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in 40 years. Yes, Mary? Thank you for finding me, for not giving up, for bringing me home. Lillian reached over and took my hand, her grip strong and sure. We found each other, Mary. That's what sisters do. The sun was setting over Edgewood, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Two sisters sat on the porch of their childhood home, hands intertwined, hearts full. The past couldn't be changed, but the future stretched out before us, bright and open and full of possibility. Arthur had tried to bury us, but we had grown back, and we had won.